Next, we will hear from Linda Warren. Linda worked at Kellogg Brown and Root as a laundry foreman and morale, welfare, and recreation technician in 2004. Before her work in Iraq, Ms. Warren was a career employee with the U.S. Postal Service. She is a Marine Corps veteran and the mother of 4 sons, all of whom have served or are serving in the military. Ms. Warren is currently working in sales in Texas. Ms. Warren, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is for the sake of my 4 sons that I'm here today, and I'd like to thank you for this opportunity. Yes. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. I worked in Iraq for Halliburton in 2004. There were 2 main reasons that I sought employment with KBR in Iraq. I knew that my sons might be deployed, and I didn't want them to be afraid. I wanted them to step up to the plate when it was time and serve their country. And further, I wanted to prove to my youngest son that he could serve the country as a civilian. I was hired as a laundry foreman, and my first duty station was at D5 in central Baghdad. I supervised a total of 50 Iraqi nationals in their duties, which was to provide military laundry services to the troops. When I got there, I was appalled at the conditions under which my Iraqi workers had to labor. And American civilians working for KBR treated the TCNs and the host country nationals like slaves and did whatever they wanted with impunity. From the first day I was in Baghdad, I also noticed something happening which I felt to be very wrong. KBR employees who were contracted to do construction services inside the palaces and administration buildings were looting. They were taking tapestries and melting gold down to make spurs. They were taking carvings off the walls, and they were doing this under the direction of the camp manager. She was involved as well. So I reported this activity to the Tactical Operations Command with the military because the highest echelon of our camp was involved in this activity. Well, the next morning, the military commander came to our camp and directed us that Americans would stop the stealing. Well, once that military commander left, I was retaliated against with a vengeance. My vehicle was taken away. I was forced to sign in and out of my own laundry so my whereabouts were known at all times. I was refused privileges that everyone else had, such as going to the PX or being able to use the telephone or internet to notify my relatives that I was okay. Finally, an event happened that put my life in danger. The laundry building where I worked was a metal, non-insulated structure with no air conditioning. I estimate it was 120 degrees inside that building. The Iraqi employees of KBR had to drink from the potable water tank, which was plumbed inside the building. But this particular day, the tanks were being rinsed and the water was coming out brown. I had pregnant workers who drank that water and became ill. So I walked to the KBR offices and got cases of water and took to my Iraqis to drink. Well, the chief of services with KBR came up to me and told me that I was being written up for giving away KBR property. Well, I asked that night to make a phone call to Houston, and I had not been allowed to make phone calls, but he did allow me to make this phone call, and I made one to the KBR ethics hotline. I wasn't allowed any privacy, and all of management stood in the doorway, but I told KBR ethics hotline exactly what the Americans were doing over there. The next day, KBR security was dispatched from Babylon to our camp, and with cooperation of the U.S. military, they did a health and welfare inspection where they found enough contraband in the KBR hooches to fill a warehouse. They found wooden carvings, artwork, and tapestries in every room except for mine. Later, a couple nights later, someone showed up at my door. It was KBR security. They gave me a satellite radio, and they asked if I felt like my life was in danger. I told them yes. Well, I was also told that Houston intercepted a threatening email from one of my coworkers, and that I was to be extracted from Baghdad the next day. After being removed from the camp at Baghdad, I worked at Camp Blackjack, Radwania Palace Complex, Camp Victory, Al-Taji, and Camp Fallujah. I worked in the laundry facilities and in MWR facilities. All of the camps I worked at were the same. There appeared to be widespread corruption with no system of checks and balances. For instance, one practice that was common by the time I got in country was a drug deal. A drug deal is where KBR employees stole items out of Connex boxes that were designated to the military, and they used them to barter with. And some of these items were even given to Iraqis. If they wanted something from out in the town, they would barter with these items. Anyway, I tried to do my job and just make the best of matters. But when I was stationed in Fallujah, where my son was serving in the Marines, I spoke out again about the overt fraud in the KBR, MWR programs. It was policy to deliberately inflate the numbers of troops who use the facilities. We were instructed by our supervisors to do a deliberately misleading count of the number of people who use the facilities. To begin with, we had a sign-up sheet for all the facilities that KBR was responsible for. Each person who walked through the door signed the sheet. That was our actual count. But each facility was broken down into rooms. There would be a theater and a game room, a billiards room. Well, anytime one of the troops walked into one of those rooms, they were counted again. Further, we had hourly counts. Every hour in 24 hours, we had to walk through and count every head that was in that facility, including our TCN workforce, and add that to the daily count. I refused to falsify those numbers, and when I entered the correct totals, the next morning those figures would be changed. Further, once those figures were emailed, the hard copies were destroyed. There was no evidence to prove otherwise. The impact that that year had on me has been profound, and there were many times when I was ashamed to call myself an American working for Halliburton in Iraq. I was afraid to talk about these events, and yet when I returned to the States, I contacted members of Congress because our sons and daughters who are fighting over there, they deserve better than this. My son, who was in Fallujah with me, deserves better than this. We have a fiduciary responsibility to these boys to make sure that that money goes where it's supposed to go, and that's to support our troops. Thank you.
Ms. Warren, thank you very much. We very much appreciate your coming today. And would you describe the flag that you have?
These are Marines at Fallujah. They all came back alive, but none of them are normal. They all went through Operation Phantom Fury in November of 2004.
We thank you for being here.